This is the final video for my Math 2B midterm presentation, and let's get right to it. The figure below shows right triangles inside a rectangle. Based on the figure, which equations are true? Now, I have all the triangles written out. It's these three right here. Those three triangles are the ones that are made inside this rectangle. Triangle TQ, SU, and PR. Alright, so what we need to do is figure out which of these equations are accurate. Cosine P equals sine U, cosine R equals sine U, cosine Q equals sine T. Are any of those accurate? Well, if we go back to one of our lessons from February, sine and cosine are complementary angles. We found out that sine of A equals cosine of B, and sine of B equals cosine of A. So I have an ABC triangle written out as well. That way we can compare angles. A is equivalent to T, S, and P, while B is equivalent to Q, U, and R. I also have the ratios for sine and cosine. Sine equals opposite over hypotenuse, and cosine equals adjacent over hypotenuse. So as a little demonstration, let's go over the first one. Cosine P equals sine U. So cosine of P right here equals sine U right here. So cosine of P adjacent over hypotenuse, so right here, so it would be this over this. And then the sine of U, opposite, or the opposite side of the hypotenuse, would also be this over this. See, these two are, those two are equal. Cosine of P equals sine of U, just like the cosine of A equals sine of B. These angles, all of these angles are equivalent, as are all of these. Right. So we know that cosine of P does equal the sine of U. What about, does this cosine of P equal the sine of Q? Well, let's figure it out. Cosine of P, as we said earlier, this over this, adjacent, the adjacent side over the hypotenuse, and sine of Q, opposite over hypotenuse. So again, this is the opposite side, this is the hypotenuse. It's the same ratio. So cosine of P does equal sine of Q. What about cosine of Q equaling sine of T? Is that accurate? Well, cosine of Q would be adjacent. So do square for this one. Would be adjacent over hypotenuse. That is the cosine of Q. And the sine of T is opposite over hypotenuse. So the opposite side of T is this over the hypotenuse right here. Again, they are equal. So what about cosine of T and sine of U? Let's figure it out. Cosine of T adjacent over hypotenuse. So I'll do triangles for this one. Alright. So cosine T adjacent over hypotenuse, and sine of U. Sine of U opposite over hypotenuse, and again do triangles and triangle. These two are equivalent as well. So cosine of T does equal the sine of U. What about cosine of R and sine of U? Well, R would do this one with x's. So cosine R adjacent over hypotenuse, and then sine u. Sine of u would be opposite over hypotenuse. So x here and x here. That is not equal. They are both equal. The ratio is not the same. So this is wrong. What about cosine of q and sine of u? Again, cosine q and sine of u. Cosine of q would be this over this. And then the sine of u, as we discussed last problem, is this over this. So cosine of p, or cosine of q, does not equal sine of u. So only these four equations are true. Alright. Lastly, number 6. Right triangles PQR and TSR are as shown. Blah 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 blah. You see the triangle, you have eyes. What is the value of x if cosine p equals 2/3? So again, SOHCAHTOA, or sine, cosine, and tangent, and we need to use cosine again. And cosine says it's adjacent over hypotenuse. So cosine of p adjacent would be, let's do stars for adjacent, would be this 10, and the hypotenuse, which we'll label with I guess check marks, would be this 15. So 10 over 15, or the adjacent over the hypotenuse, does equal 2/3. If you don't believe me, 10 divided by 15 equals 0.666. 2 divided by 2 divided by 3, 0.6666. There we go. So 10 over 15 does equal 2/3. The question is right. But now we need to figure out what is the value of x. To do that, we need to take the two cosines and cross multiply. So 10 over 15, adjacent over hypotenuse, and then 6, because look, this p is equivalent to this t. So this is also an adjacent angle, and this x is the hypotenuse of this small triangle. So 10 over 15 equals 6 over x. Cross multiply. So do 15 times 6 equals 10x, as is shown here. 15 times 6 equals 90, and 90 equals 10x. Divide both sides by 10 to get x alone, and you're left with 9 equals x. So now we need to figure out if this equation, or this solution, is accurate. As we discussed earlier, 10 over 15 equals 2/3, and 6 over 9, well, let's test it. 6 divided by 9 equals 0.666. 6 over 9 does equal 2/3, and that is all for the Math 2B midterm presentation. Thank you.